Hey everybody, how's it going? Today I'm going to be doing a book review on The Molecule of More by Daniel Z. Lieberman, MD, and Michael E. Long. This is a very nice read. It's a very informative read. Also, it's pretty simple and easy to follow along. Before I get started on my review, I'd like to talk about the author. So, Daniel Lieberman is a professor at George Washington University, and I guess he collaborated with Michael Long on this book. And Daniel Lieberman, I watched an interview about him talking about this book, and he was very informative, knowledgeable on dopamine and neurochemistry. And I guess he teamed up with Michael Long and just made this very beautiful book that it flows very nice. It's a very nice read. And if you don't know who Michael E. Long is, he's essentially a writing god. He's a playwright. He also writes speeches for politicians. A very gifted writer. So they collaborated and made this book, and I absolutely recommend it. It's a great read. One of my opinion on this book is that it's very nice to know about neuroscience and dopamine, and I think you'd be interested in this book if you would like to know how human nature works a little bit better, and actually how the world works. There's a lot of topics that they cover. There's the introduction where they teach you basically dopamine, and then there's the here and now chemicals. They're like serotonin and endorphins, and how dopamine is basically the chemical of you pursuing stuff. Like that's like the future. If you go pursue something, you get excited, and then there's endorphins and serotonin that help you be more happy with what you have at the moment. The first chapter that they talk about is about love, how dopamine works with love. Essentially, that dopamine, you get a big dopamine rush when you enter a relationship, and after a year, it's more of like a serotonin base. It's like you're more content with the thrill is basically gone, and you're just happy just being in a relationship at that point. How dopamine works within that. It also talks about drugs. It's kind of interesting. The drug part was very interesting. That's where they talk about drugs because, when you see homeless people outside the street, they probably use drugs, right? And it's kind of, you wonder why they do that. Well, it kind of goes and explains, like, for them, they're making the right choice because in their head, they think that they're making the right choice by just being on drugs and then not having what we call a productive life, therefore. So that kind of helps you understand how that works on the neurochemistry level. Absolutely amazing. And then he also talks about domination, how dopamine works with domination. It's very curious how that works, and it's completely weird. But it's kind of like, I can't really explain it all that great. It's kind of complicated. It's you want to go pursue and dominate it, but it's kind of like you have to collaborate with everybody. So you have to have the toughness to do that and just kind of follow through. It's interesting. It also talks about creativity and madness was chapter 4, which is an excellent chapter because it talks about how dopamine stimulates creativity, and people who they use a special word, it's like dopamatic or something, are really creative people. They have just constant flowing. But it also talks about how dopamine has something to do with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, where bipolar disorder is not enough dopamine and schizophrenia might be too much, or it's not triggered the right way. And then kind of talks about how creativity and madness, quote unquote, when he says madness was really referring to is schizophrenic behavior, are really related. And schizophrenics, if they have the right schizophrenia is a very broad term, but if they have the right one, essentially, then they can be very, very creative. That's the output that they have. He goes ahead and talks about one of the singers of the Beach Boys. Now, he made very great songs and all that, but then he talked about later that around 20 that he started developing schizophrenia. He would just think of music nonstop and he would just hear voices, but nobody really knew about it, but he projected that in his music. Very interesting. Next, it talks about politics. Was absolutely amazing chapter. It kind of talks about dopamine and politics and how politicians are very dopamatic. They when I say dopamatic, it's more of like that they have a high dopamine output in their brain. They just have a constant pursuit of whatever that they do. But it turns out that politicians, they're very dopamatic people, and it's kind of interesting. It correlates divorce and politicians, where I guess people that are dopamatic, they don't like staying in relationships. And he said that people that are politicians, the divorce rate is around 80%. was crazy. So yet again, if you like to understand the political climate, you might want to consider reading this book about dopamine. It will help you a lot. Another chapter that they do is about progress, where he kind of centers more in like the tech industry, where the United States actually attracts dopamatic people because we are a nation of immigrants, and so we actually per capita have a larger percentage of dopamatic people compared to the rest of the world because of our nature of the country. So there's a lot of people that come here that are really dopamatic. They become entrepreneurs. They kind of do their thing, and it kind of drives the whole tech industry and industry in general. And how this strive for dopamine is increasing, or the like Silicon Valley and all of that, but at the same time could lead to the doom of the human race. Unfortunately, so they also talk about dopamine, but they also talk about the here and now chemicals. And he was saying that to have a happy life, it's not to pursue dopamine, but it's to really balance it out with serotonin and endorphins and all that, to kind of go full circle, if you will. So if you are a very dopamatic person, like I think I am, and you kind of want to be happy with and content with what you have and being in the moment, I suggest you read this book, because it will help you do that, or give you an idea of what to do. Another thing it talks about is harmony. Was essentially what I just said. What is, progress is great, going above and beyond is great, chasing that dopamine rush is great, because it's kind of based on the human race. It's kind of built upon this. But at the same time, is if we don't basically check yourself before you wreck yourself, because you will. Right? So they kind of talk about, you might want to do less, like on your phone is a very dopamatic thing to do, but there's no ending to it, right? There's always more. You're always pursuing more on your phone. So instead of doing that, you should probably do something you're getting something done, but also feel the sense of accomplishment, like, oh, I got this done, I feel fulfilled. So building harmony is, using dopamine to pursue whatever you want to do, but make sure that the outcome leads to fulfillment, right? And cut out things that are dopamatic behaviors that don't lead to fulfillment, like, like alcoholism, for instance. Once you get to the bottom of the bottle, it's never enough. You always want more. That is not a fulfilling action that triggers your dopamine sensors. You might want to do something else. This book kind of helped me understand human nature a little bit better, because basically for me, I'm kind of interested in how the brain works, but I'm also interested in how the world works. But the world works because there's how the world and people influence cultures and all that. This book kind of gives you a better understanding of that, because it kind of shows how deep people work on a neurological level, where I think he's put up a quote by Rockefeller. Like, he's a Scottish immigrant that moved to the States, and I guess a quote in the book was that people who are content with their lives don't go across the Atlantic. So dopamine, obviously dopaminergic people, they're not content with what they have, and they always strive for more. So therefore, they're willing to go pursue. And it kind of talks about who those people are and what those people do. It kind of talks about how human nature's left Africa and how dopamine had influence in that. Um, it also kind of helps me with the whole political climate because it kind of spells out um, dopamine and IQ. I agree with Stephen Hawking's quote where if you worry about IQ, then you're a loser. But it kind of does brush upon IQ a little bit, where IQ is actually a test not to really determine your intelligence, but to determine your dopamine or how dopamatic you are. So if you have a higher IQ, the more dopamatic you are. So it's basically a test to see what your max output could potentially be. Um, and then also things like trying to understand human nature with addiction and all that. If you kind of want to have a better understanding of how addiction works, I highly recommend this book. Also, if I were to equate this book to food, I would compare it to lemon meringue pie. And I say that because Daniel Lieberman provides the information about dopamine. That's really tangy information. He used that custard base. Michael E. Long is the meringue on top. He's that very light. I think it's the meringue is egg white. I believe it's like sugar and egg white, right? So he's that very fluffy, light, little sweet thing that kind of helps with that very dense custard. So that's why I say that this book it would be equivalent to a lemon meringue pie. That was just a feeling I got from it after I read it, and I'm really excited for you to read it. I got this book off of Amazon, right? You know, I'm sure a lot of people get their books off Amazon. You can too. And if you'd like this review, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm doing more book reviews here in the future. I'm just waiting for the books to arrive. Alright, ciao.